Welcome all to this new reading group session organized by Continuum AI. Today we have the pleasure to host Tom Benyan from Sorbonne University, who is going to present his recent paper, Teaching Continual Learning with Modular Networks and Task-Driven Priors. So thank you so much, Tom, for being with us today and for accepting our invitation. Of course, you can have this talk without interruption or with interruption as you like. Please tell us what you prefer. Otherwise, we will maintain all the question and answering session at the end of the talk. Thank you so much, Tom, and the stage is yours.
Okay, thanks a lot, Vincenzo. So what I propose is that I quickly go over the paper, like a presentation of something like 20-30 minutes, and then we can discuss what you want about this paper, the specific points people want to dive in altogether. But if at some point you feel that there is something you don't quite understand or something like that, feel free to interrupt me. There is no problem with that.
Great.
Okay, so thanks a lot for everybody for being here. So I will present you this paper, our last paper. This is joint work with Ludovic Denoyer and Marco Llorenzato, who are working at Facebook AI Research Lab. And I am working at Sorbonne University in the machine learning and deep learning for information access team. So a little bit of context. In continual learning, we can tackle very different kind of stream, and each stream can have its own level of diversity of task. So, for example, in the most standard stream, like the incremental version or the split version of Cypher or ImageNet and so on, the diversity is rather low. Tasks are pretty much all related and often comes with a lot of data. So that's one setting. You can also have different domains in your stream, like as it's the case in the visual domain decathlon, where you will have, for example, natural images, hand-written recognition, or some very fine-grained classification tasks. Or you could also have different modalities in your stream, like text or speech, vision tasks, or even some tasks that will combine several of these modalities. And another domain in which the stream can vary and which is not as much popular as the other one is the amount of data. You can have some tasks that have a lot of data, a lot of examples, and some of the tasks that will have just a few, like a few short learning tasks, something like that. And this one is particularly challenging. So yeah, the main problem is that a lifelong learner can face very different kinds of streams. And in some of these streams, you will have tasks that you can't solve just with the data that you are given right now. You will need to leverage the data from prior tasks to be able to solve them, but you won't be able to do it like using an independent network. This is something I want to really emphasize, because usually we make the assumption that a large data set comes with each task, and that the independent network, so training one network from scratch on each task, can be considered as an upper bound of the performance. In this setting, when you can have some tasks that don't have a lot of data, this is not the case anymore, because if you are able to transfer knowledge from prior tasks to the small one, you will reach a better performance. So this is just the main context of our work. So the contribution of this paper is first to identify a set of properties that we would like a continual learning agent to have to be able to face these kind of streams. Then once we have this set of properties, we will define metrics and specific streams to measure the performance of a lifelong learner or any kind of algorithm on these particular properties. So this will give us a multidimensional evaluation, one for each property we identified. And then we will propose, so this contribution is a new benchmark named the control benchmark. And then we will propose a new algorithm that is able to perform well on most of these properties and of these benchmarks. So the continual transfer learning benchmark. The first property that we want to have is the ability to directly transfer knowledge from one task to another. So to be able to assess it, we construct a synthetic task, a synthetic stream based on real-world data set, but the stream is crafted by hand to be able to measure this specific property, where the first task will be the same as the last one. Task 2, 3, 4, and 5 will just be distractor tasks that are not related to this first task. And we will see that on each of the streams that we define, this is the case. We have 2 tasks that we call the probe tasks that are interesting to us, and a set of distractors. So here, the first task has a lot of data, and the last one is the same, but with way less data, like an order of magnitude less training examples. So in order to be able to solve this task, we need to transfer knowledge from this one. So we need to be able to recognize that something we learned on this task need to be used to solve this one. The second property is the knowledge update. It's the opposite. The first task is the small one, and the last one will be the large one. In this case, recognizing that the first and last task are exactly the same, or are the same, but is not enough, because if we do that and we try to return the same predictor as we did here, we will have a problem, because we won't make use of the new data or all the new information that we have here, and then we will perform poorly, and even worse than a new network trained from scratch on only the last task. The third and fourth properties are the transfer to similar input and output distributions. What it means is that the last task will be a modified version of the first one. So for example, for this one, S-in, so the stream where we modify the input distribution, the last task will use the same classes than from the first task, but with the input data perturbed, where we apply a small transformation to the input data, so that the task is very similar, but the raw data is not the same. And S out is the same thing, but there we apply the transformation on the output of on the labels of the task. So here we will see that it's just a label permutation. The fifth property is the plasticity. We just want the stream to be able to keep learning as the number of tasks increases. So what we will do is simply give to the learner a stream of very independent tasks where we do not expect any transfer between the tasks, or at least not between the distractor task and the probe task that we want to investigate. And we will compare the performance of the learner on this stream versus just learning on the last task. And ideally, if the learner is plastic enough, we shouldn't observe too much interference, or no interference at all. And the performance on the last task after having seen the scene, or the performance on only the last task, should be the same. And the last dimension is the scalability. We want to verify that a learner is able to keep learning as the number of tasks grows, but grows more than 10, 20, 50, or here we will try with 100 tasks, where the stream is composed of, is generated in a way that we will have all the different properties that we saw previously in the stream. So in the particular stream that we are proposing, we will have a mix of large and small tasks. So large tasks contains up to 1,000 training examples per class when we have that amount of data. If we have less training data available in the data set, we will use all the data available. And for the small task, we will have only 5 training examples per class. So in this case, transferring is necessary to be able to solve the task. So each task is a 5-way classification problem, where first we select uniformly one data set, and then from within this data set we select 5 classes, and then we select corresponding number of training and validation samples. To make things a little bit realistic, we have 3 different data regimes. So in the first one, which we can call the initialization, where our learner doesn't have a lot of knowledge yet available, we will mix 50-50 large and small tasks. So we will encounter a relatively large amount of large tasks to be able to bootstrap the system. And then as we increase in task IDs, as we see more and more tasks, we will decrease the ratio of large tasks to end up with 100% of small tasks. So here, basically, if the model is not able to transfer, it's bound to fail. Okay, so more concretely, how do we define these streams? So for the direct transfer, the probe task will be CIFAR10, and the other task will be MNIST, describable texture dataset. So here it's a dataset of picture of different texture, and we need to identify the texture. So for example, striped or zigzag or something like that. Fashion MNIST or Street View house numbers. So this task, we don't expect them to transfer to CIFAR10. They are just here to perturb to distract the learner. On the first task, we have a lot of examples, and on the last task, we have way fewer samples, 10 times less data. For the knowledge update, this is the opposite. The very small task is the first one, and the large one is at the end of the stream. So here we want to train a lot, while here we want to transfer a lot. For the input perturbation, this time the probe task is a variant of Rainbow MNIST. So basically what we do is just we change the background color between the first and the last task. Here, for example, the background of the MNIST digit will be put on the background color blue, and here the color will be red. And that's the only thing that changed. And the number of examples, here we have a fewer examples because for MNIST, even 400 samples is enough to learn something. So here we made sure that an independent network without prior knowledge isn't able to solve this task. So if it's able to solve it in this stream, it means that it's transferring knowledge. And for the out distribution, here again we use the same setting of the first 2 tasks, where the last task is just a shift of the labels. So we are sure that no category has the same ID in this task and this task. So the only thing that a model should have to do is relearn the last layer, but it must have, before that, it must be able to identify that it's the same task as the first one. And for the plasticity, we use a simple stream where the probe task is at the end, and we will compare the performance on this task after having experienced the whole stream versus just training on this task. Okay. For the metrics that we will use first the average accuracy at the end of the stream. So here F is the predictor, F of T is the predictor on task T after having seen the whole stream. So it means that we will take each predictor, train at on each task at the end of the stream, and average the accuracy of all of them together. The forgetting, so how much we will measure the difference in performance between the accuracy of each predictor, so the predictor of a task T after having seen the whole stream versus the predictor on task T after having seen the stream up to task T. So this gap between the accuracy right now and the accuracy when we learn the task and the accuracy at the end of the stream is the forgetting. And the transfer, here we have no average. The transfer on the stream is the difference in performance on the last task of the stream, the predictor of the last task of the stream, minus the last task of the stream while having seen all the tasks of the stream, minus the performance of the same predictor, but this time trained on only this last task independently. Okay, so this was it for the continual and transfer learning benchmark. So now we move on to the modular network with task tree and priors. So for this one, we first, here basically the idea is to mix pre-trained modules with newly pre-trained and frozen modules with newly introduced module for each task. So for the first task, we don't have the choice. We will just use blank modules that we will train from scratch. Here we can see that each edge is a module, and this module is composed of 2 ResNet blocks, but a module can be whatever you want. Here the idea is just to, here we just show what we did, but of course if you want to use another architecture, it works the same way. So for the first task, we train a full column, a full network, no problem. Then we freeze it. And when we face the second task, we will instantiate a new column and instantiate a lateral connection as well to be able to branch out of the past of the first model where we want. For those of you who are familiar with progressive neural network, it looks a little bit like that, where we want to be able to reuse features from the past that we train on past experience, but we also want to be able to customize them or to train a whole set of new features if the tasks are too different or if we don't want to share a lot of knowledge. So, and now that it's the search space, but what we want in that is a single ResNet model. So basically what we will search now is a path in this graph, is the best path in this graph. There are several ways of doing that. We will talk about them right in the next few slides. But for now, let's just admit that we have a search algorithm that's able to give us the best path possible. And let's say that the best path is this one for the second task. So here we take the first and the first layer and the second block of the first module, and then we need to retrain because this new task, this second task, is different from the first one. So we want to train a large amount of parameters. So what we do is that we freeze these modules. We discard all the modules that we didn't use so far. And when the third task comes, we do the same thing again. We instantiate a new column. We create this lateral connection, and we give it to our search algorithm, and so on. So what kind of search algorithm can we use? We tried, and in the paper we present 2 ways of finding this best path. The first one, which we named MNTDP-S for stochastic, is a stochastic search algorithm. I won't go in too much in detail of this one right now because it's not really a contribution of this paper, but of a previous paper. But if you want to discuss that later, we can do that. Basically, in a few words, when you have your search space, you will put define a distribution over the edges of your graph, and you will jointly learn the parameter of this distribution and the parameters of the new layers that you introduced, so the blue edges here. And in one shot, in only one training procedure, you will find the architecture, both the architecture and the corresponding parameters that you want. And in the end of the training procedure, you will have a deterministic distribution of our architectures, of our path in the network. So here it's this one, and the corresponding parameters in the blocks here. And the second search algorithm we used, which is the deterministic version. Here what we do is that for each path in the search space, we will train the network to convergence. Then we will evaluate it on the validation set and take the best one. So this one is very easy to parallelize, but as you can see, it can be expensive if the search space is very large. And the same for the stochastic version. If the search space is very large, it's difficult to explore it. So we might result with suboptimal architecture. So the main problem here is the scalability. So if we add new modules at each time step, and at each, when we have a new task, we branch from each past column, we will have a problem because the search space will grow with the number of tasks. So we need a way to restrict this space. So here we introduce the task-driven prior that will help us prune the search space, and we will restrict the search space to a constant size. And to do that, we will basically use the similarity between tasks, the semantic similarity between tasks. So there are different ways of doing that. We could compare data sets and things like that, so, but this is difficult. What we did is, let's say we are in this situation when we want to train on task 4. So here we have the predictor for task 1, here the predictor for task 2, and here the predictor for task 3, after having seen task 1 and 2, and task 1, 2, and 3. When the fourth task comes, what we do is we chop the head of all these predictors, and we compute the features. So here the function is not the predictor anymore, but it's the features of this predictor for the task 1, the features of the predictor for task 2, and so on. We put the fourth dataset inside this, inside each of these predictors. That will give us the set of features here. And we use these features with the validation set. We take each sample on the validation set, and we do KNN to find the closest features in the feature space for each of these spaces. And the one that gives the best performance means that they are partitioning the space in the feature space. They are partitioning the space in a way that it allows us to perform well or better than chance, at least on the new task. So it means that there are some kind of similarity between the space we want to learn and the space that was learned at this time. So if we are able to reach a better performance with this KNN thing, we will rank this predictor higher, and we will select the top K predictor from which then we will branch. So here is just a quick overview of everything I just said. So let's say we have the first column here, the second here, where we branch from after the first layer. When the third task comes, first we identify the most promising. Here we do top K1, K equal 1. So we just select the best performing predictor to branch from. So we identify in this case that this is the second one. We instantiate the new modules, and then we do we select one of the two search algorithms, either the stochastic or the deterministic one. And let's say that the best architecture is this one. So if we took the stochastic version, the best path that we found was this one. So we will discard these two modules and freeze this one, add it to our system, and move on to the next task. So for the experiment, all the baseline, basically all the baselines share the same backbone. And something I want to spend a little bit of time on is the fact that we use the task level cross-validation. So there are several reasons for that. The main one is that since the tasks are very different, we may want to use different learning rates or different regularization strength on each task. For example, if you have a lot of data you don't want to regularize, you don't need to put a lot of regularization. But if you have only 5 samples per class, you will have you will have to use a lot of regularization, or you will overfit like crazy. And another thing is more in the kind of problem we want to attack. So in the idea of a lifelong learner, the fact of replaying the stream several times to find the best parameters, it's kind of counterintuitive, because ideally you want to release your lifelong learner and it will keep learning forever. So if you need to set the parameters to either replay the stream several times or select a subset of the tasks and hope that these tasks are representative of the rest of the stream, it might be a problem because you don't know how many tasks you have in the stream or things like that. So if you have, let's say, parameters like in EWC or things like that that control the trade-off between plasticity and memory, you don't have a good way to do that if you don't know the total size of the stream. So in our model, what we do, and with all baseline for which it makes sense, we only do the task level cross-validation. Of course, for methods like EWC or HAT, we have to do the task level cross-validation to set some parameters that are global to the stream. But yeah, please note that this is an unfair advantage for this approach. The different baselines are the independent models, where we train one model per task. So this one would be an upper bound of the performance if all tasks were large, but this is not the case here, so we might outperform this approach. Fine-tune is just one network that we will train on all the streams on all the tasks without freezing anything. In new head, we just change the head and freeze all the feature extraction part of the network. So this is something that's quite common in transfer learning. New leg is the opposite, where we only change the first layer and freeze all other layers. So EWC and unlike EWC, I guess you know what they are, or we can discuss about it later. We also compare to experience replay, progressive neural networks, the hard attention to task, and dynamic expandable networks, and reinforced continual learning. So, but for these two, as we will see, we only do them on the MNIST permitted task because we do not have any implementation for the using convolutional network. So first, we will quickly go over the standard benchmark to show that our method performs in a similar way as the other baselines. These ones are not that interesting in our setting because since in this standard data sets, in this standard stream like permitted MNIST or split CIFAR 100, all tasks comes with a lot of data, so you don't expect to transfer much. And if you have enough data to train a lot of new layers, our network or our model, the modular network, will prefer instantiating a lot of new modules and then to be able to perform well. And it results here in a large memory consumption. So here, as we can see, for example, for CIFAR 100, so here we have the average accuracy, the forgetting, the memory consumption. So the memory consumption here again is a little bit different of what is usually done, because what we measure is everything that we need to keep around to keep training. It's still in this idea of never-ending learning, where the stream might go on forever. For example, if to keep learning, you need to have the replay memory or a set of constraints or parameters, things like that. We count that in the memory because this is part of the memory consumption of the usage of your learning agent. And flops is the number of floating point operation done for the whole training, not just for inference, but for obtaining each predictor on the whole stream. So we can see that here basically what our model does is, from the number of parameters, is find something very similar to independent network, and it allows it to perform very well, and the same on permitted MNIST. On the continual transfer learning benchmark, here things are a little bit more interesting. We kept only the most interesting baselines, but all the numbers are in the paper if you want to see a little bit more. So for the S-, which is the direct transfer, we can see that here the optimal strategy is, of course, a new head, where on the first task, which is large, you train a whole new network. And then on the last one, you train, you do whatever you want with all the distractors. But on the last one, what you want to do is just either retrain the head as new head does, or just return the exact same column that you train on the first task, which is what our model does. And of course, independent does not transfer anything. Fine-tune fails as well. Yeah, so you can see that basically the optimal strategy is to reuse most of the layer unchanged from the first task, and we are able to reach this level of transfer. For the S plus here, what we want to observe is a zero transfer, because the transfer is the difference between learning only on the last task versus learning on the stream and the last task at the end of the stream. So if you have achieved a transfer of 0, it means that there is no interference, that the previous tasks didn't change the performance of your model on this last task. So here we are able to achieve that. So this is a good result as well. For the input change, here it's a little bit different. So the best strategy, if you only change if you perturb the input data, is to change the first layer. But as we can see here, it is a design choice from us to not allow connection to in this direction. So the new leg here that performs very well on this stream is not in our search space. So in this example, it's a good example of properties that the MNTDP approach, as it is right now, doesn't have, and it's a good thing that the benchmark is able to catch that. For the out distribution, here we shuffle the labels. Here again, the optimal strategy will be a new head, because what you want to do is just to train the last layer and reuse the features from the first task. And this is exactly what our network does. And for the plasticity, which is a measure of interference, here again we see that there is no problem. The deterministic version, at least for the deterministic version, there is no problem. It's able to keep learning, like to learn the last task without being perturbed by the task it's seen before it. Under this line, we have the comparison with HAT. And here below the line, all the backbone is AlexNet, and above it, all the backbones are ResNet. Here we have some fancy plots using the ResNet backbone here and the AlexNet backbone here. So it's interesting to see that, for example, in most of the dimension of the control benchmark, our approach, the deterministic version of the modular network with task tree and priors, is able to perform very well. There is just this dimension of the input distribution, as we saw earlier, that this version of the network is not able to have. And the compute efficiency, as we can see, because for the deterministic version, we train all these models in parallel, which is quite expensive, but parallelizable. Similar observation can be done with the AlexNet backbone. So here, just a qualitative analysis. We can see that on the S out stream, our network is able to quickly. So here is the first column. On all of these tasks, which are distractors and from which we don't expect a lot of transfer, we can see that a lot of new modules are instantiated, which is expected because tasks are very different. So we can't reuse too much of the features from the first task. But when the last tasks come, the last task that is the same as the first one with way less data and the labels permitted, we can see that the MNTDPD is able to reuse most of the features of the layers and only train the last output layers. And the dashed lines doesn't contain any parameterized transformation. They are just here to show the input and the output of each predictor. And for the long stream, we can see as well that basically the only one able to really perform well is the MNTDP. All of the baseline fails or does not perform very well. Here we see the overall tendency of the training on these streams. So here in the horizontal axis we have the task ID, and we see that most approaches are, even if they are able to perform very well when we have a small number of tasks, at some point they will saturate here or here, and without saturating, the MNTDP model is able to perform to scale sublinearly if we compare it to independent, while obtaining a better accuracy in the end. So thank you all, and I'm waiting for questions.
Thank you so much, Tom, for your great presentation. I really enjoyed it. It was very clear and neat, so thank you so much. So maybe I can start with a few questions, and then we'll leave also the other attendees to ask their questions. Well, first of all, a comment. I really enjoyed the new scalability metric that you were introducing. I think it's very important for continual learning. It's not very common to see papers talking about that. So it's something that I really care about. It's something that I was wondering, I mean, what we could do to face that issue. So I'm really glad that you did in your paper. Actually, I mean, in this case, it's scalability with respect to the number of tasks. Something that I wonder for your paper was also if you consider this scalability in terms of dimensionality of the input space, for example, because I've seen, I mean, all the experiments that you did were about NIST, CIFOR, I mean, all data with image resolution of 32 by 32, right? Mm-hmm. So, do you think that especially your method in this case that you propose would scale with the data dimensionality?
Indeed, we didn't try with something bigger than 32 by 32, but I don't think there should be any problem with that. All you need to do is maybe scale. I think I don't see a reason why it wouldn't work. Like, you would use different blocks here. For example, you would use the bottleneck blocks, or things like that. But these are two very independent things. So if the input dimensionality is bigger, you will have to make adaptation in your search space and in your backbone. But all the benchmark will still hold, like no problem, nothing different. And for the network, for all the task-driven prayer, no problem at all, because it's just to restrict the search space to a constant size, so it doesn't matter what the actual modules are in it. And for the search algorithm, you would just change what's in each of your blocks. But no, I don't think there would be any problem with that.
Oh, that's great. So for each of those columns that you introduced for each task, in this case, they are of fixed size, or have you considered also changing, for example, the number of feature maps or something like that to reduce the space?
That's a very interesting question. So in this work, we didn't try different sizes. I mean, what we did is modify a little bit the ResNet architecture to have the same number of parameters in each edge, because on the standard ResNet, the most of the parameters are in the last layers. But in this case, if you want to be able to control the growth of your network, and in transfer, what is often done is just changing the last layer or last few layers. If you do that, you change most of the parameters, and that's a problem. So we wanted to be able to introduce, not have one edge with 80% of the parameters and another edge with 2%. So we tried to balance that. But we could definitely use something more difficult or more complex than that, where we have one column, for example, let's say exactly the same as this one, but here we could have another column that skips skip one block or two blocks or things like that.
Yeah.
We actually did that in another paper where the idea was really to find small architectures, but in this one, no, we just stay with the same backbone and the same architecture for each task.
Yeah, yeah, it would be like an optimization, you say, that we can make. And then one last question from my side would be, I mean, in this case, you propose these, especially the metrics are proposed, taking in mind like a sequence of well-defined tasks. Do you think like in scenarios like class incremental learning or other scenarios where there's no notion of task, this benchmark could be used? I mean, especially the metrics that indeed are very interesting. Or do you think that they're taught and designed to be used within this kind of task incremental scenario, and that's it?
I think they will need a little bit of rework because okay, so no, I think it's possible because this idea of transferring and to see what in which case it's able to transfer and in which case a model isn't is not a specific question specific to the task incremental setting, but it could be used in the class incremental setting. But from what I know, most of the class incremental setting use classes that are very like similar, or that will shift slowly over time. And here, what's very interesting is what happens to see when we have a clear distinction between domains where at some point you don't want to transfer. So in the standard class incremental setting, that at least the versions I know of, it's kind of easy to know what you want to transfer from because most of what you've seen so far is very related to what you are currently trying to do. In this setting, so for example, let me show only one. So yeah, for example, when in this setting, the interesting part are these hard boundaries where when we encounter this task, basically what we want is to have something very different from here, and we don't want to transfer from here. We don't want to lose time or memory trying to transfer from here, and we want to return a predictor on this one that has almost nothing to do with this one. And this is what we observe, like on the small graph I showed in the end.
Yeah.
I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Tom. So, are there any more questions from the audience?
Yes, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So first of all, thank you for your great presentation. I think your work is a very, very clever idea to tackle the continual learning or related field, because reusing knowledge is always good. And if I understood your idea, it's reuse as much knowledge, as much past knowledge as possible for a new task, and instantiate a new layer or a new piece of network only if necessary. But I didn't understand really well when you explained how can you compare two different tasks when you add new layers in the network. So if I understand well, you talked about feature in the last layer. You compare the features. If you can explain this point again. Thank you.
Okay, so I will take okay, I see. Yeah, I went quite fast on that part because I saw that I was a bit late. So yeah, okay. The main idea of that is to prune the search space. So we don't want the search space to be linearly growing with the number of tasks. And if like in professional network, each task we just add a new column and connect it to everything we had so far, it's impractical. At some point, we won't be able to find a good architecture. So here the idea is to find in all the past predictors, all the predictors that we already have. So here we are on task 4, we already have 3 predictors. Which one will be the more relevant to transfer from? Okay?
Okay, yeah.
So to do that, you could either use, you want to have a metric or a way to measure the similarity between your current task, so here the fourth task, and each of the previous ones. So you could do that by comparing data sets or doing things like that. What we do is basically use the new task to and use the predictors from the past tasks to see if in the feature space created by each of these predictors, one of them is similar or kind of match the feature space that we would like to have for this new task. So what we do is put all these or a subset of the new data set, the new training set, in this in each of the predictors. So let's say, okay, let's focus on the first predictor. We compute the features of the new samples using these predictors, and we use these features to do KNN on the validation set of the new predictor. If this KNN thing, the K nearest neighbor, is able to perform better than chance, better than random, it means that the separation that is done by this predictor, the space here, the feature space at the last layer of this predictor, structures is structured in a way that allows to predict on our current task. It's not perfect. It's not the best prediction possible, of course, because these are not the same task. But if example from the same label in the new task are put in the same part of the space of the feature space here, it means that these tasks are semantically related. So what we do is that we will rank each of these predictors based on the accuracy that we obtain when we run this K nearest neighbor algorithm in the feature space. And we will take in this example for K equal 1 the best predictor, the one that gives us the best performance in the feature for the KNN in the feature space to branch from. Is it clear or?
Yeah. Now it's clear. Thank you very much. It's a very clever idea, I think.
Thanks a lot. Okay, so we tried different things, but the idea is just to see what is semantically similar to what we want to do now at task 4.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Tom? Julio, please go ahead.
Hi, I have a question. Thanks for the presentation. This was really clear. I have a question about, you mentioned that the connections goes to the new, from the old columns to the new ones. But you mentioned that no connections are between new ones and the old ones.
Yeah.
Why is that?
That's a design choice. That's because most of the time, this is what performs well when people are doing transfer. The idea is to see how many pre-trained layers do we want to use and where do we want to start to fine-tune. But in the paper, we did an ablation where we tried with the full version where we have connection in the other direction. And it's able, for example, to work very well on this stream here in the SIN stream, where the input dimension change. But usually, since all the tasks are visual tasks, the very low level layers are shared, so which would be edge detection or things like that. And where we want to change is more in the highest semantic features. But I think that it would be interesting to try when we have not only different domains but different modalities to see what happens if, for example, we have similar tasks but with different modalities. These first few layers, as we can see here. Okay, so I will just discuss about that in 1 minute. But yeah, I would be interested in seeing a kind of stream where it performs better to have this connection to the past, to the fixed layer, in this direction. And here we see that even if the tasks are not related, because we have Cypher, MNIST, DTD, and things like that, the first layer is always almost shared, and even here we are sharing one more, because this thing is what usually, it doesn't really matter what task we are trying to do with that. So, but this is a design choice, and this was just a way to restrict the search space to be able to scale. But yeah, you are right. We could totally do it with a connection in both directions.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it makes sense that only lower layers in our models can be shared, but maybe finding a solution that you can share also upper layers is maybe it could be a nice solution, but I understand your idea that only fewer layers can find these like generic representations of the
and as I said, this is not optimal because we see on the S-in stream of the benchmark that our model fails on this stream because by design, it's not well designed for this kind of stream. Here, what we do is we know we have an a priori on the kind of stream that we will work with, so we make this design choice. But yeah, as I said earlier, like if we have different modalities, I think this is maybe not a good assumption anymore.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Any more questions before closing our session? All right, so that's it. Thank you so much, Tom, again, for your presentation and your time. This was one of the best presentations we had, I think, in a very long time here at Continual AI. So thank you so much again. And I remind all of you here present, all the people that will watch this on YouTube, that we have this reading group every week at the same time on Friday at 5:30 p.m. in set time, Central European time zone. So thank you again all for being here today and for the great discussion. Thank you so much. Bye, guys.
Thanks a lot.